She was rejected on a date for being deaf? Until a billionaire at the next table signed, "You deserve better."
The sun hadn't yet decided whether to stay or hide behind the San Francisco fog when Amaya Rhodes turned the key to her small flower shop for the first time that day. It was a ritual that had repeated itself for 3 years now, always at the same time, always with the same quiet reverence, like someone opening the doors to a temple where flowers were the faithful and she, the priestess of petals and fragrances she would never fully experience. Her fingers glided over stems still damp with dew, arranging white lilies beside wine-colored roses, building arrangements that seemed to whisper secrets to those who observed them. But Amaya didn't hear whispers. Never had. And maybe that's exactly why her hands spoke a language the noise of the world could never silence. She adjusted a bouquet of yellow tulips in the window display and pinned a small handwritten note to it. For anyone who needs to remember that better days exist. It was an old habit, almost confessional, writing what she couldn't say out loud, letting her words reach hearts she might never truly know. Customers loved those little notes. They said it was a special touch, something that made her flower shop unique. What they didn't know was that each word was also a cry for help disguised as kindness, an attempt to build bridges where there was only invisible glass separating her from the rest of the world. And the glass was transparent, but impossible to cross. The doorbell vibrated, didn't ring, vibrated. And Amaya looked up. A woman rushed in, already gesturing something incomprehensible with her hands while speaking too fast for Amaya to read her lips. She smiled patiently, grabbed the notepad always within reach, and wrote, "Good morning, how can I help you?" The woman seemed surprised for a second, then embarrassed, then excessively kind. The kind of kindness that came with poorly disguised pity. She bought a simple arrangement, left a tip that was far too generous, and walked out with a smile that said, "Poor thing," louder than any words could. Amaya put the money away and returned to her flowers. They, at least, never treated her like something was missing. There was a strange contradiction in her routine. Amaya loved this work, loved the discipline of waking up early, the delicacy of each petal, the satisfaction of creating beauty where before there were only loose stems. But at the same time, she felt like she was living inside an aquarium, visible to everyone, even admired, but separated by a barrier no one seemed to willingly truly cross. People looked, waved, smiled politely, but few actually tried to have a conversation. Few had the patience to read her written responses or learn the basic gestures that would make everything easier. And Amaya, in her almost chronic sweetness, never demanded anything from anyone. She simply accepted, absorbed, and moved forward with her gentle smile and her impeccable arrangements. The day unfolded as always, customers coming and going, orders being written down, flowers being wrapped with satin ribbon bows. But when afternoon began to settle and golden light flooded the shop, Amaya felt something different. An emptiness that wasn't new, but in that moment weighed more than usual. She stopped in the middle of arranging pink peonies and looked around, taking in the walls decorated with dried garlands, the vases lined up on the shelf, the small empire of flowers she'd built alone. It was beautiful. It was hers. But it was also lonely in a way that hurt in places no one could see. At 7 in the evening, when she locked the door and flipped the sign to closed, Amaya sat for a moment in the chair behind the counter and closed her eyes. She felt the low vibration of the city outside, cars passing, people laughing somewhere nearby, music playing at some bar down the block. All of it existed around her, but not with her. It was like watching a movie without subtitles, where everyone seemed to know the script except you. She opened her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to push that thought away before it settled in for good. After all, she had a good life, didn't she? She had her work, her independence, her quiet strength. So why sometimes did all of that feel like it wasn't enough? When she left the flower shop and walked through the busy streets of San Francisco, Amaya felt her phone vibrate in her pocket. It was Elena, her best friend, the only person who truly spoke her language, literally. The message was short and to the point. Need to talk to you, today. It's important. Amaya frowned but smiled slightly. Elena always found everything urgent, dramatic, essential. And maybe that was exactly what she needed right now. Someone who could bring a little noise, even if silent, into her too organized life. What she didn't realize was that this conversation was about to change everything. But change, well, it has a habit of arriving without warning, doesn't it?
Elena had that way about her of not taking no for an answer, and Amaya, well, she had that way of giving in just to see her friend happy. That's how she found herself, 3 days after that urgent conversation, standing in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the navy blue dress Elena had insisted she buy. "You need to let yourself live, Amaya," she had signed with that unwavering conviction of someone who thinks they have all the answers. "This guy is nice, I swear. Friend of my cousin's boyfriend. Successful, handsome, polite. Just give it a chance, okay?" And Amaya, against all her instincts of self-preservation, said yes, or rather nodded yes, because maybe, just maybe, it was time to believe again that someone could see her as more than the deaf florist on the corner. The restaurant was the kind that intimidates. Crystal chandeliers, tables with impeccable linens, waiters who seemed like silent judges of who deserved to be there or not. Amaya arrived a few minutes before the agreed time, as she always did, and sat at the reserved table, trying not to look as nervous as she felt. Her hands sweated slightly as she smoothed the cloth napkin, and she caught herself wishing she was back in the safety of her flower shop, where everything made sense and nothing required her to expose herself like this. But then he arrived, Theo Colden. Tall, sharp features, impeccable suit, a smile that seemed rehearsed to impress. He waved from afar, walked to the table with the confidence of someone used to being noticed, and extended his hand. Amaya smiled, shook his hand, and felt the first sign that something wasn't right when he frowned slightly upon realizing she hadn't said hi back. He sat down, picked up the menu, and started talking, fast, animated, gesturing in a way that made it impossible to read his lips. Amaya waited for a pause, then pulled out the notepad she always carried and wrote, "I'm sorry, I'm deaf. I need you to speak more slowly so I can read your lips, or we can write." The change was instant. His smile froze. His eyes scanned the paper as if reading a death sentence, and when he finally looked up at her, there was no warmth left, just discomfort, irritation disguised as politeness. He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and said something Amaya caught perfectly. "You didn't mention this before." And in that moment, the floor of the elegant restaurant seemed to collapse beneath her feet. She tried to explain, or start to explain, but he was already shaking his head, looking around as if searching for a dignified exit from this awkward situation he clearly hadn't signed up for. "Look, no offense, but this is kind of complicated, you know? I thought we were going to have a normal night. Talk, laugh, whatever. I didn't expect to have to be writing or—" He made a vague gesture with his hand, as if her existence was a technical inconvenience. Amaya felt her face burn. Not from shame, or not just that, but from a quiet anger that was starting to boil beneath her skin. He kept talking, something about waste of time and misunderstanding, and then, without even waiting for the food to arrive, he stood up. He left some bills on the table, as if money could erase the humiliation, and walked out. Just walked out. And Amaya sat there, alone, surrounded by people who were talking and laughing, and living in a world that, once again, made it clear she didn't fully belong to it. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. Not here. Not in front of all these well-dressed strangers who were probably already looking, judging, pitying,
She grabbed her purse, ready to get out of there as quickly as possible, when something caught her attention. A movement at the table next to hers. A man, sitting alone, his back to her until then, turned slightly and signed. It wasn't a random gesture. It was deliberate, clear, perfect. You deserve better. Amaya froze. He was signing? To her? The man smiled, not a smile of pity, but of genuine understanding, and waved slightly, as if asking if he could approach. She was still processing the shock when he stood up and, with a politeness that contrasted brutally with everything that had just happened, asked in sign, "May I sit, or would you rather be alone?" Amaya didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to run out of there, go home, bury herself under the covers, and never again believe in dates or in people or in anything that involved opening up to someone. But another part, the part that still believed, even after everything, that the world could be kinder than it seemed, nodded yes. He sat down carefully, as if entering sacred space, and introduced himself, Aaron. She spelling it slowly with his hands, A-A-R-O-N. And then he did something no one had done in a long time. He asked how she was, not automatically, but as if he genuinely wanted to know. And Amaya, who had spent years building invisible walls around her heart, felt a small crack form. It didn't hurt. On the contrary, for the first time that terrible night, she could truly breathe. They talked, or rather connected, for hours. Aaron told her about his work, about the city, about how he had learned sign language when he was still a teenager. She asked why, and he hesitated before answering, as if opening an old wound. "My mother," he signed, his eyes growing distant for a second. "She lost her hearing gradually. Degenerative disease. I didn't want her to feel alone in those last years, so I learned, so she would always know I was there." Amaya felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. He understood. He truly understood what it meant to exist in a world that insists on talking louder than listening. And when they finally left the restaurant, it was past midnight, and Amaya had the strange feeling that something had changed. She didn't know if it was for better or worse, but changed, oh, it had. And as Aaron waved a "see you later" before getting into his car, she caught herself thinking something she didn't dare admit. Maybe, just maybe, love didn't need words to exist.
Amaya didn't expect to see him again. Casual encounters are exactly that. Casual, fleeting, beautiful moments life offers before moving on with its usual programming. But Aaron Fuller apparently didn't understand usual programming. The day after that unlikely night at the restaurant, Amaya was kneeling on the floor of the flower shop, organizing clay pots she had just received, when she felt the familiar vibration of the door opening. She looked up and, for a second, thought she was imagining things. But no, it was him, Aaron, standing in the doorway, holding a bouquet, not just any bouquet, but something clearly assembled by inexperienced hands, with flowers that matched more by luck than by technique. He smiled somewhat sheepishly and signed, "I tried. Didn't turn out as good as yours, but it's the thought that counts, right?" And Amaya, who had spent years building defenses against disappointment, felt all of them shake dangerously. She stood up, wiping her hands on her soil-stained apron, and walked toward him slowly, as if testing whether this was real or just another cruel fantasy her mind had decided to create. Aaron extended the bouquet, red roses mixed with white daisies, an arrangement that defied all rules of chromatic harmony, but somehow had an awkward, sincere charm. Amaya took the flowers, felt their weight in her hands, and read the small card attached to the ribbon. "For the person who reminded me that kindness still exists." She looked up at him, and Aaron shrugged, as if apologizing for being what? Thoughtful? Present?
Everything she was sure no one else would be with her, but at the same time, a small, skeptical voice inside her head whispered, "What if it's pity? What if he's just trying to be nice because he feels sorry for you?" Aaron noticed the hesitation in her eyes. He was good at that, reading between the lines, catching what wasn't said. He signed again. "Can I take you for coffee? Or tea? Or juice? Whatever you prefer. No pressure. Just wanted to talk more." Amaya bit her lip, torn between the desire to say yes and the paralyzing fear of opening up to someone who might not truly understand what it meant to be part of her world. But then she remembered the night before, how he had talked with her for hours without showing impatience, without treating her way of communicating as an obstacle. And maybe, just maybe, it was worth the risk. She nodded yes, grabbed her purse, and together they left the flower shop, walking side by side through the sunny streets of San Francisco. And for the first time in a long while, Amaya didn't feel alone in the crowd. They went to a small coffee shop, one of those with worn wooden tables and the aroma of freshly ground beans in the air. Aaron ordered a cappuccino, Amaya chose chamomile tea, and they sat near the window, where afternoon light drew golden patterns on the table. At first, conversation flowed easily. He asked about the flower shop. She talked about how she had started the business, about the love she felt for transforming something as delicate as a flower into a message of affection. But then Amaya asked the question that had been hammering in her mind since he showed up. "Why are you here, Aaron? Why did you come back?" And he paused, his smile fading a bit, as if deciding how much truth to share. Finally, he signed, "Because last night was the first time in months I felt connected, really, not superficially, and I didn't want that to end."
Amaya felt her heart tighten. There was sincerity in his eyes, yes, but also a deep sadness she recognized. The sadness of someone who had lost something precious and was still learning to live with the emptiness. She ventured, "Your mother? Do you miss her?" Aaron closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, they were shining with an emotion he didn't try to hide. "Every day," he answered. "She was my best friend, and when she left, it was like I had forgotten the language that connected us, you know? I stopped signing, stopped remembering, until yesterday, until you." And in that moment, Amaya understood. He wasn't there out of pity. He was there because they both carried their own forms of silence, their own forms of loneliness. And maybe, just maybe, they could learn not to be alone together. They spent the entire afternoon in that coffee shop, talking about everything and nothing, about dreams, fears, about the small things that make life bearable and beautiful at the same time. Aaron told her about the pressure of running a giant company, about how sometimes he felt like he was living the life everyone expected of him, but not necessarily the one he wanted. Amaya shared about the constant fear of not being seen fully, of being reduced to one characteristic, as if her deafness was all she was. And as the hours passed, and the sun began to set, painting the sky in orange tones, something changed between them. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't sudden. It was subtle, like a flower opening slowly, petal by petal. It was the understanding that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and that maybe true love began exactly there, where two people decide to lay down their weapons and simply exist in each other's presence. When Aaron walked her back to the flower shop, twilight had already taken over the city. They stopped at the door, and for a moment neither of them said anything, or rather signed anything. They just stood there looking at each other, as if memorizing that instant before real life came back to interfere. Then Aaron did something unexpected.
He raised his hand and slowly, like someone holding something too fragile to break, lightly touched her face. It wasn't invasive. It was reverent. And then he signed, with an intensity that made Amaya's heart race. "I want to know you, really, every part, if you'll let me." And Amaya, who had spent so much time protecting her heart, felt all her defenses crumble at once. She didn't respond with words or signs. She just smiled. And in that smile, Aaron found the only answer he needed. But what neither of them imagined was that truly knowing someone also means facing the abysses each person carries inside. And those abysses, well, they have a habit of testing even the most sincere loves.
3 weeks, that's all it took for Amaya's life to transform into something she didn't recognize anymore. But this time, in a way that didn't scare her, but rather enchanted her. Aaron had a habit of showing up unannounced, always with that calm smile and some surprise hidden in his hands. A book about botany he saw in a bookstore and thought she'd like, a ridiculous cactus-shaped keychain that made them laugh for minutes on end, or simply himself, willing to spend hours helping her water plants and reorganize inventory. Elena said Amaya was glowing differently, and maybe she was, because for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she needed to translate her existence to be understood. With Aaron, everything just flowed, as if they had always spoken the same language even before they met. But the real world, the one that exists beyond the pink bubbles of the beginning of a romance, has the cruel habit of reminding us that differences exist, and some of them weigh heavy. It was on a Saturday morning that Aaron suggested, "Let's walk across the Golden Gate. I've never taken you there." Amaya laughed, not because the idea was funny, but because it was so touristy. She, who had lived in San Francisco her whole life, rarely went to the bridge, but she accepted because lately she accepted almost everything that came from him, as if compensating for years of refusals and self-imposed isolation. They drove to the starting point, and as soon as they stepped onto the bridge, the wind hit hard, messing up Amaya's hair and making her scarf flutter. Aaron walked beside her, hands in his coat pockets, looking not at the stunning view of the bay, but at her. And Amaya noticed, of course she noticed, how he watched her with that intensity that made her stomach flip. It was adoration, it was desire, it was fear of losing something precious. It was everything together, mixed, raw, and exposed like the landscape around them. They stopped in the middle of the bridge, and Aaron pulled out his phone, gesturing for her to pose. Amaya rolled her eyes but smiled, letting him take the picture. Then he turned the screen to her, showing the image. Amaya with wind-blown hair, the city in the background, a genuine smile on her face, the kind of smile she rarely saw in herself. "Beautiful," Aaron signed, and then he added, with a mischievous glint in his eyes, "The view's pretty nice too." She pushed him playfully, and they laughed, the kind of laughter that doesn't need sound to be felt. But when the laughter passed and silence returned, not her silence, but their shared silence, Aaron asked a question that changed the tone of the afternoon. "Have you ever thought about leaving San Francisco, seeing the world?" And Amaya frowned because that seemed random, out of place, as if he was testing something he didn't yet have the courage to say clearly.
She responded slowly, "I love my flower shop. It's everything I built. Why would I leave?" Aaron hesitated, and for the first time since they'd met, Amaya saw something she couldn't completely decipher in his face. Was it worry? Guilt? He signed, "I was just thinking, sometimes we outgrow the place where we started, you know? And there's nothing wrong with that." But his answer sounded evasive, and Amaya felt a pang of discomfort in her chest. She didn't push, not in that moment, but she filed that conversation away somewhere in the back of her mind, where seeds of doubt begin to germinate silently. They kept walking, but something had changed. Nothing obvious, nothing dramatic, just a small crack in the perfection they'd been building together. And cracks, however small, have a habit of expanding when least expected. That night, Aaron took her to dinner at a discreet restaurant, nothing like the one where they'd met, but rather a cozy place with low lighting and small tables that invited intimacy. They ordered pasta and wine,
And during the meal, Aaron told her more about his work. He talked about the renewable energy company he ran, about ambitious projects, about the responsibility of leading hundreds of people. And the more he talked, the more Amaya noticed the chasm separating their realities. He lived in a world of multi-million-dollar decisions, international travel, business dinners on 3 continents. She lived in a world of delicate petals, local customers, and the simple satisfaction of seeing an arrangement take shape under her hands. They weren't opposite worlds necessarily, but they were distant. And for the first time, Amaya wondered, can this really work? Or are we just postponing the inevitable? Aaron must have sensed the shift in her gaze because he stopped signing about work and asked, "Where are you? Physically here, but where'd your mind go?" And Amaya, who was never good at hiding what she felt, was honest. "I'm thinking that our lives are very different, and wondering if that's something we can overcome or if it's something that will pull us apart." Aaron was silent for a long moment, and then he did something that surprised her. He laughed, not in mockery, but in relief. "Amaya, I don't care if you live in a palace or a 1-bedroom apartment. I don't care if your business is worth $1 million or $100. What matters is who you are, and who you are is the person I want by my side." The words, or rather the signs, were beautiful, sincere, but Amaya couldn't completely shake the fear that eventually the differences between them would exact their price. She chose to believe, at least for now. They left the restaurant holding hands, walking through the illuminated streets of San Francisco to his car. And when Aaron dropped her off at her door, he pulled her gently closer and kissed her. Not urgently, but with a tenderness that made her heart melt. It was a kiss that said, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere," at the same time. But when Amaya went inside and closed the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment, she couldn't ignore the tightness in her chest that insisted on remaining. Because she knew this feeling. It was the premonition that something was about to change. And changes, however inevitable they may be, rarely come without pain. As she prepared for bed that night, Amaya looked at the bouquet Aaron had made for her, still alive in a vase on the kitchen table. The flowers were holding on. But for how long? And would their love hold on too through what was coming?
The news arrived on a Tuesday, disguised as an opportunity. Aaron was sitting on the couch in Amaya's small apartment, the one 2 floors above the flower shop that eternally smelled of jasmine and damp earth, when his phone vibrated insistently. He looked at the screen, and Amaya saw the immediate change in his expression. His jaw tensing, his shoulders going rigid, that brightness in his eyes that wavered between excitement and something that looked a lot like panic. He signed, "Need to take this. It's the office. Important." And he went out to the balcony, leaving Amaya alone in the living room, watching through the glass as he gestured on the phone, spoke quickly, ran his hand through his hair in a way she'd already learned meant stress. When he came back, 10 minutes later, he had the face of someone who had just received a sentence. Only Amaya didn't know yet if it was one of freedom or imprisonment. Maybe it was both. Maybe it was something much worse. He sat down beside her slowly, like someone preparing to defuse a bomb, and stared at his own hands for too long before finally beginning to sign. "Tokyo," he said, and the word alone was enough to make Amaya's stomach turn. The company closed the biggest contract in our history, renewable energy for all of Japan. It's massive, revolutionary, but they need me there, supervising, coordinating, in person. Amaya felt the world slow down around her, not in the poetic way people describe in movies, but in a nauseating, claustrophobic way, as if the air had gotten heavier and her lungs couldn't process it properly anymore. She forced herself to ask, "For how long?" And Aaron hesitated. That hesitation was already answer enough. They're not sure exactly. Maybe a year, maybe more. Depends on how the project evolves. And there it was, the bomb exploding silently between them.
Amaya stood up, needing space, needing movement, anything to keep the apartment walls from collapsing on her. Aaron stood too, trying to reach her, but she signed for him to stay where he was. She needed to think, needed to process, because this wasn't just about him leaving, it was about everything that represented. It was about how, deep down, she'd always known this moment would come, that someone like him, with such a vast world at his feet, would eventually realize that she and her small flower shop were too small, too limited. She turned to him, and there were tears in her eyes when she signed, "So that's it, you're going." It wasn't a question. It was a bitter statement, loaded with all the disappointments she'd collected throughout her life. And Aaron, to his credit, didn't try to soften it. "I don't want to go without you," he answered, and there was genuine desperation in his gestures. "Come with me, Amaya. Come to Tokyo."
The proposal should have sounded romantic. Should have sounded like those movie scenes where the protagonist drops everything for love and lives happily ever after in a distant country. But to Amaya, it sounded like a request for her to disappear, to erase everything she'd built, everything she was, in the name of an uncertain future beside someone who might not truly understand what he was asking. "And my flower shop?" she signed, trying to keep her voice, or rather her gestures, steady. "I spent years building that, Aaron. It's not just a business. It's who I am. It's my voice when I can't speak. It's my connection to the world." Aaron took a step forward, and there was frustration mixed with something like impatience on his face. "I know that. That's exactly why I'm offering to help. I can finance a flower shop in Tokyo, bigger, better, with everything you need. You don't have to give up your dreams. Just adapt them." And that's where something broke inside Amaya. Not with a crash, but with a dry, definitive snap. She looked at him, at this beautiful, well-intentioned man who genuinely believed he was offering a perfect solution, and saw for the first time the real chasm between them. Because Aaron saw the world like a chessboard. Problems had solutions. Obstacles could be overcome with enough resources. And love was a matter of logistics. But for Amaya, it wasn't about money. It never was. It was about autonomy, about not being saved, but seen, about building something with her own hands and not having to thank anyone for it. "You don't understand," she signed, and the hurt was visible in every movement. "You think you can buy my entire life? That you can just recreate everything somewhere else like it's a model? My flower shop isn't replaceable, Aaron. And neither am I." He recoiled as if he'd been slapped. "I didn't mean it like that. I just want us to stay together. I'm trying to find a way to make this work." But Amaya shook her head, and the tears finally began to fall. "You're trying to make you work, your career, your dreams, and you're expecting me to just fit in, like a pretty accessory you can pack in your suitcase." Aaron tried to protest, tried to explain, but she didn't let him, because she'd heard enough, had felt enough of the cutting pain of realizing that in the end she would always be the person who had to adapt, mold herself, diminish herself to fit into someone else's life. And she had promised herself on that horrible night at the restaurant with Theo that she would never again accept being less than she was. Not for love, especially not for love. "I think you should go," she signed, and her voice, even silent, sounded broken. "I think you should go to Japan and live your big life, and I'll stay here and live mine. Small, maybe, but mine." He stood there for a long moment, as if waiting for her to change her mind, take it back, say she was overreacting. But Amaya didn't take it back, and eventually he grabbed his jacket, walked to the door, and before leaving, turned one last time. "I love you," he signed. And there was truth there, a painful and useless truth. "I really love you." Amaya nodded slightly, acknowledging it, but not returning it. Because sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes love needs more than feeling. It needs understanding, respect, space for two people to grow without one having to wither
so the other can flourish. And they didn't have that. Maybe they never had. The door closed behind him, and Amaya collapsed on the couch, sobs finally escaping without control. And for the first time since she'd met him, the silence wasn't comfortable. It was deafening, heavy, empty. But it was hers. Completely hers. And maybe just maybe, that was exactly what she needed to remember who she really was.
3 months, 90 days, 2,160 hours since Aaron Fuller boarded a plane bound for Tokyo, taking with him his ambition, his good intentions, and a piece of Amaya's heart she didn't know she'd given. But life, stubborn and insistent as always, went on. The flower shop expanded, not because Amaya wanted to prove something to anyone, but because the loan finally came through, and because she needed something to pour all that pain into that insisted on pulsing beneath the surface. Now she had 2 rooms, one for customer service and simple arrangements, another for events and larger orders. She hired an assistant, a young woman named Sophia, who was learning sign language and had skilled hands with flowers. The flower shop was breathing new life. But Amaya? Well, she was still learning to breathe again. Some nights were easier than others, and some nights she still woke up in the middle of the night searching for a warmth that was no longer there. It was on a Friday afternoon, with the sun beginning to set and paint the city in orange tones, that the doorbell vibrated in a way that made Amaya look up from the orchid arrangement she was assembling. Sophia was in the stockroom organizing deliveries, so it was up to her to answer. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the entrance, expecting to see a regular customer or maybe a delivery person. But when she opened the door and saw who was on the other side, the world stopped, literally stopped. Aaron. He was thinner, his face marked by an exhaustion she recognized, not physical, but emotional, the kind of tiredness that comes from living a life that doesn't feed the soul. He wore jeans and a simple shirt, nothing like the impeccable suits he used to wear, and carried in his hands nothing. No gift, no bouquet, just him. And maybe that was exactly what they needed, just them, without props, without distractions, without anything that could mask the raw truth of what they were to each other. Amaya froze, not knowing what to do. Part of her wanted to slam the door in his face and protect the heart that had taken so long to begin healing. Another part, the stupid romantic part that still believed in second chances, wanted to run to him and check if he was real. Aaron didn't move. He just stood there, waiting, as if he knew he had no right to invade that space without permission. Finally, he signed slowly, with a hesitation Amaya had never seen in him before. "Can I come in? Or would you rather I leave?" And there was so much weight in that question, not just about that moment, but about everything, about whether there was still anything between them worth saving. Amaya took a deep breath and, against all her instincts of self-preservation, took a step to the side, opening the way. He entered slowly, like someone entering a sacred temple where they're no longer sure they're welcome.
They stood in the middle of the flower shop, surrounded by flowers that seemed like silent witnesses to this unlikely reunion. Sophia peeked out from the stockroom door, sensed the tension in the air, and discreetly left through the back door, giving them privacy. Aaron looked around, noticing the changes, the new shelves, the expanded space, the more elaborate arrangements displayed in illuminated cases. "You've grown," he signed. And it wasn't just about the business. It was about her, about how Amaya had found strength where before there was only doubt. She nodded slightly, crossing her arms not defensively, but protectively. "And you? You came back from Japan. Why?" The question was direct, no beating around the bush, because she no longer had patience for games, for half-truths, for conversations that danced around what really mattered. If he was there, she needed to know why. And this time, he needed to be honest, completely honest. Aaron ran his hand over his face, and when he began to sign, there was a naked vulnerability in his gestures. "Because I was wrong. About everything." He paused, searching for the right words, or rather the right signs. "I thought I was offering you the world, but actually,
I was asking you to give up yours. I didn't see that at the time. I was so focused on finding a solution, on making things work my way, that I didn't stop to think that maybe my way wasn't the right one. Amaya felt something stir in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. She signed, "And Tokyo? The big contract? Your career?" Aaron smiled, but it was a sad smile, loaded with regret. "I turned down the permanent position, trained someone to take my place, came back." And before she could ask why, he added, "Because success means nothing when you're living the wrong life. And without you, I was living the wrong life." The words, the signs, were beautiful. They were what Amaya had dreamed of hearing during those 3 months of painful silence. But she had learned, the hardest way possible, that beautiful words aren't enough. Actions matter. Choices matter. So she asked what she really needed to know. "And what changed, Aaron? Because if you came back expecting me to just forget everything and go back to where we were, you're wrong. I'm not that person anymore, and I won't be again." Aaron shook his head quickly, taking a step forward, but still maintaining respectful distance. "I don't want you to be. I want to know who you are now, and I want you to know that I understand. Your dreams aren't smaller than mine. Your life isn't less important. And if I stay, it's here. It's in your city. It's in your world, not the other way around." Amaya felt tears burn in her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were something more complex. Relief, perhaps, mixed with fear, hope, and a million other emotions she couldn't even name. She walked toward him slowly, and when they were finally face to face, so close she could feel his warmth, she signed, "Some things are priceless, Aaron. I learned that, and I hope you did too." He smiled, a real smile this time, without sadness, without weight, and signed back, "I did. The hard way, but I did." And then he did something that completely surprised her. He opened his mouth, and for the first time since they'd met, he vocalized. The words came out, imperfect, broken, but loaded with so much emotion that Amaya could read perfectly on his lips. "I love you." And in that moment, surrounded by flowers and the soft afternoon light, Amaya understood that sometimes love doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be true. And finally, they had that.
Amaya and Aaron proved that true love doesn't require someone to shrink themselves to fit into the other's life. It grows when two people choose to build together, respecting each other's dreams and essence. Just as she discovered she deserved to be loved without having to justify her existence, and he learned that success without true connection is empty, each of us also carries that power of transformation within. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late to start over, to choose the love that sees us whole, and to believe we deserve relationships where we don't need to dim ourselves to shine. Amaya's silence was never absence, it was pure presence, waiting for someone who knew how to listen to it. And Aaron found in her the language he had forgotten, that of surrender, of vulnerability, of love that respects before it demands. Together, they built something rare, a love that doesn't ask for impossible sacrifices, but invites mutual growth. If this story touched you, write in the comments, "Love transforms lives." Subscribe to Eternal Romance Stories and experience with each episode emotions that warm the soul and reflections that transform the heart. Here, every story is a reminder that true love exists, and it always speaks the right language when it finds the right person. And this was just one of many stories that will still move you here.